Although it now seems like a distant nightmare, in 2021, a year after the COVID-19 outbreak, Italy seemed no different than it was in 2020. Indeed, the country was a far cry from the Mediterranean democratic paradise that myself and other expats had been promised. But let's back up for a second.
16 million people in the country's hot zone, now in lockdown.
2021 didn't get off to the best of starts, and the immediate future seemed just as bleak. With each region now divided into coloured zones, the lightest of which entitling you to the most freedoms, the effort to contain the spread hadn't evolved much over the past year.
COVID-19 is ravaging the country.
Mario Draghi, the replacement for Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte, who suddenly and inauspiciously copped out of the lockdown parade, seemed to be an even tougher cookie than his predecessor. The entire country continued going back and forth into total lockdown, only to ease up for a few weeks, filling us with false hope that we were heading towards some sort of normality, and then ultimately shuffling us back inside again like the frightened rats that we were. And I was, for a lack of a better English word, stufato, and craving adventure. So I got my government endorsed vaccine in order to be able to travel. I said my goodbyes to both my friends and my beloved apartment in San Cesario di Lecce, packed a large suitcase with almost everything I owned, and set off with earnest hopes of ultimately ending up in the city of Brescia to the north. I didn't quite make it to Brescia until much later, but we'll get back to that in another video. First step was Corfu in Greece to see my parents and to have a much needed break. Then I spent a few more days in Lecce, where I bought a new camera for the upcoming adventure, the DJI Osmo Pocket. I went to a drag show, flew some drones, and headed to see my friend Sara's nonna in the Leccese countryside, before heading to the first stop on my itinerary. Napoli.
Woohoo! It's me!
Napoli, or Naples, as it's known outside of Italy, is one of my favourite places in the country. It's chaotic, dirty, and cramped, but those things don't matter to you once you're here. There's an atmosphere in this city that grabs you as soon as you arrive. The locals are some of the most accepting in all of Italy, because, as the saying goes, Napoli è per tutti. Naples is for everyone. Instead of the dreaded Flixbus, which, not just in Italy but also in the rest of Europe, has gone to hell in a handbasket, I opted this time to use the much preferred and slightly more expensive Itabus. The journey was super comfortable and it made the scenery as we left Puglia, passed through Basilicata and into Campania all the more enjoyable. We got to Napoli late in the evening and I went straight to my hotel to get some much needed sleep before the adventures ahead. The hotel was dingy, smelly, and my room was, well, I composed a little ditty during my time there which underlined the worst of it. I'm in a dingy room in Naples. It's rather small. There are vagabonds on the bedside table. There are handprints on the wall. Fortunately, I wasn't planning on spending much time there. The first time around I didn't get to see much of Naples at all, but this time was going to be different. Day 1. I woke up early and headed straight to the first thing on my itinerary, Capello Sano, or the San Severo Chapel, which is filled with a bunch of famous sculptures from the 18th century, the most famous being Il Cristo Velato, or the Veiled Christ. It was about a 20-minute walk through the historic centre. Keep your wits about you here, as it's not uncommon to have two presumed 12-year-olds burling towards you on a moped with no helmets on, all concerned for personal safety. Ah, Napoli. After a good 20-minute walk I made it to the chapel. But, unfortunately, they told me on the door that there were no tickets left, and that I'd have to book ahead of time if I wanted to see it tomorrow. I was a bit defeated, but no bother. There was still plenty more to see, like this sculpture of the Nile god, located down Spacca Napoli. This statue was likely made by Alexandrian settlers from Egypt in the 2nd or 3rd century. It actually has a bit of a funny history. Over the centuries, the statue has been lost, stolen, decapitated, and restored countless times. Most recently, the head of the Sphinx, which was stolen during the Second World War, along with 3 of the putti, or fat winged children for those uninitiated, was recovered in Austria in 2013. Following this, the statue was again restored and has managed to stay in one piece since its unveiling back in 2014. The street that it's on, as I mentioned, is called Spacca Napoli, and it's the main street through the historic centre. The name literally means split Naples, because it's like a dividing line that splits the city in two, as can be seen from above. The historic centre is my favourite part of the city. There are treasures around every corner, like this antique watch shop. And there's one thing that Neapolitans do better than anyone else, and that's tat. Forget your usual fridge magnets, t-shirts, etc. Why not pick up a bust of patron Saint Maradona, or a statuette of Putin, or the Queen? And the best thing is, nothing is forced on you. You can either buy something or not, they don't give a shit. Next, I went inside the Basilica di San Lorenzo Maggiore, a very modestly decorated church by Catholic standards, with some fantastically unique works of art. After exploring the church, I went for another wander around Napoli, intentionally trying to get a bit lost. I stumbled upon Maradona in his proper attire. To say he's worshipped here would be an understatement. Then I found a unique fountain from the 16th century, La Fontana della Scapigliata, designed by architect and sculptor Giovanni da Nola, responsible for numerous notable works throughout that period, including l'Altare Maggiore, as we saw in the Basilica di San Lorenzo Maggiore. Here's a rare photo of commoners around the fountain in the late 1800s. As you can see, Napoli hasn't changed much in the last 120 years, and, in stark contrast to most places on the planet, that's a big part of its charm. It was getting dark, and I was still a bit tired from the previous day's journey, so I headed back to my hotel near the train station, with the ever-ominous Mount Vesuvius clearly visible in the background. Day 2.
So, we're out on the road again, heading to San Severo for the second time. I just stood in somewhere, I'm not sure what. Anyway, so this time I had to book a ticket in advance because otherwise there was no chance. When I went before, it was pretty full. Even the last minute line for tickets was there was about 30 people. Busy streets in Napoli again.
Along the way, I had a riveting conversation with this charming chap.
Bello il negozio, complimenti.
So, it's strictly forbidden to film inside San Severo, just as in other museums in Italy. The Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, for example. To me, it's a bit of a stupid rule. There's a myth that flash photography can harm works of art, but there's nothing substantiating it. Flash photography can be annoying, so I can get on board with banning that, but non-flash photography and filming, there's no real justification for it, other than trying to make sure that people have to visit such places themselves in person, despite there being numerous resources and examples of the works available online already. Nevertheless, I'm the sort of upstanding citizen who follows all rules blindly and respects every facet of the law. So I of course didn't film.
Coming up now on San Severo. I'm going to put my camera away.
But luckily, there was somebody who went there at around the same time as me, on the same day, and even used the same sort of camera, and he wasn't such an eager rule follower.
Thanks to this DJI, which you can film quite discreetly. I've been testing it out at home, like angles where I can put my hand down. I mean, what's the worst that happens? They kick me out, but...
This maverick ne'er-do-well has given me express permission to use their footage. Here it is in all its glory, Il Cristo Velato, the Veiled Christ by Giuseppe San Martino. It's such a masterful example of marble sculpture that for centuries there have been countless legends and accusations that alchemy was used to create it. Instead of being carved from just one single block of marble, the legend alleges that the Prince of San Severo, who commissioned the piece, who himself was an alchemist and stonemason, Raimondo di Sangro, laid a reel over the sculpture and transformed it into marble by way of a chemical process. Nonsense, ultimately, and proven false, but fascinating nonetheless. A misconception is that this sculpture, like many others of repute, were worked on by just one individual. This was almost never the case, as in the case of Il Cristo Velato. There were likely hundreds of assistants who did the bulk of the preliminary carvings, before the named, commissioned artist would lay the finishing touches at the end. But the mastery really is in these final details. But Giuseppe San Martino didn't work from nothing. No, instead he actually took over the commission of this work from another artist, Antonio Corradini, who passed away before he could complete it. San Martino copied from Corradini's terracotta bozzetta in working the piece into marble. One piece that Corradini was able to complete, however, also resides here in San Severo, La Pudicizia, or the Veiled Truth, which is just as impressive. But to me, the greatest and most impressive work within San Severo is this one, Il Disinganno, or Release from Deception, depicting a fisherman being released from a net by an angel. This was carved from just one single piece of marble. Absolutely incredible. The artist was Francesco Quairolo, responsible also for La Ricchezza dell'Autunno, or Wealth, which lies atop of one of the columns of the famous Trevi Fountain in Rome. In the lower parts of San Severo are two horrifying works referred to as the Anatomical Machines, again commissioned by Raimondo di Sangro and completed by Giuseppe Salerno in the late 18th century. Apologies for the footage, I mean, the guy who recorded this wasn't clued up on anti-flicker at the time. These creations used real male and female skeletons to reproduce the human circulatory system. Other than the human bones, the other components were fabricated using metal wires, wax and silk. There was even once a fetus displayed at the base of the woman's feet, representing an open placenta and connected by an umbilical cord, but this was apparently stolen in the 1990s. After San Severo, I trekked myself to a spritz and chilled in a nearby piazza. I had another little wander around Napoli, and ended the day marvelling over this statue of Garibaldi. Day 3. Day 3 was all about exploring. San Severo turned into a 2-day ordeal, albeit a worthwhile one, but I barely had any energy left to do much else. So today I was mostly going to wander around the city and see what stuck out. There were a few things that I wanted to see towards the port, so that was my rough direction. But whatever I saw along the way was for the city to decide. The first thing happened to be the main campus for the University of Naples, Federico II. Now, although the building itself was constructed at the end of the 19th century, the university actually dates back to the 13th and is believed to be one of the oldest state universities, if not the oldest in the world. I kept on towards the port down Corso Umberto Uno when I stumbled across a familiar sight at the roundabout, a statue of Vittorio Emanuele II. If you visit Italy, you're almost guaranteed to either hear his name or stumble across one of these statues. And if you're unfamiliar with Italian history, as I was, you may be thinking to yourself, who is this mustachioed devil on horseback? Why is he so revered so as to have a statue of himself in almost every major Italian city? A legitimate query. Well, Victor Emmanuel of Savoia was the first king of a unified Italy in 1861, until his death in Rome not long later. His remains can be found inside the Pantheon with the inscription Padre della Patria, or Father of the Fatherland, etched on his tomb. L'Altare della Patria, located in Piazza Venezia in Rome, and something we will visit in a future episode, was built in his honour. Making my way downtown, walking fast faces past, I finally arrive at the port of Napoli and come face to face with a castle under heavy reconstruction, Castel Nuovo. This castle also played an important part in the unification of Italy. It was for many years the seat of the Bourbon monarchs, no relation to the biscuits. Following the capture of Naples by Garibaldi's forces, the Bourbon ruler at the time, King Francis II, fled Naples and the castle along with his forces, ending the Bourbon rule of Naples and the two Sicilies. The castle's had a very storied history since it was built in the latter half of the 13th century. There are even legends of a crocodile living below the castle who would swim up the dungeons and devour prisoners. In 2004, while excavating around the castle to create the new metro tunnel, animal bones resembling those of a crocodile were actually discovered nearby. The origins of these remains were never confirmed, but for many at the time, it gave further credence to the myth. Continuing on my adventures, I came across one of my favourite buildings in the entire city, Galleria Umberto Uno. It's reminiscent of a popular building in Milan, Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II. And across the way is one of the most famous sites in all of Naples, La Piazza del Plebiscito, which is hugged by the galleries of the, and I'm going to have to take a deep breath here, Basilica Reale Pontificia San Francesco da Paola. Opposite we have the Royal Palace of Naples, otherwise known as Palazzo Reale, depicting its prominent rulers since the Kingdom of Naples was founded in the 12th century. This month I was supposed to cancel my Midjourney subscription, but of course I forgot. So, to get something out of that investment, I asked the AI imaging software to imagine what these kings would look like in modern times. In chronological order we have Ruggero II or Roger the Norman, Federico II or Frederick II, Carlo d'Anjou or Charles I, Alfonso V or the Fifth, Carlo V or Charles V, Carlo or Charles III of Spain, Joachino Murat, and, last but not least, our boy Vittorio Emanuele II. Inside the palace is said to be magnificent, but we'll save that for another time. Instead, I went inside the basilica. Off to the right as you enter is a small chapel, very unassuming and drab, but by venturing into the central body of the basilica, you step into a scene like something out of a God of War map. Perhaps more interesting than the basilica itself was the recent discovery of a hypogeum, identical in size to the interior of the basilica, but several meters below ground. This is speculated to have been intended as the future royal burial grounds for the aforementioned Bourbon family. But, as we touched on before, they were chased out of the city before this could occur. I only had one mission left in Napoli before leaving the next day, seeing Virgil's egg castle. I'll explain later. On the way, I stopped for a memorably disappointing gelato and enjoyed the views of Mount Vesuvius from the port, found just about 100 meters away from the Piazza. I had a leisurely stroll down the seaside, until I came face to face with the last thing on my checklist, Castel de Lavoro, or Castle of the Egg. This is the oldest castle in Naples, and it has a fascinating history. But, being Naples, it's sometimes hard to distinguish fact from fiction. According to the historians, the origins of the castle date back to an 8th century BC Greek settlement, Parthenope, that resided on the tough islet where the castle stands today. The next major change to the location would be in the 1st century BC, when it became the site of an eccentric Roman general's personal villa. With a name like Lucius Licinius Lucullus, you can only imagine how lavish this place was. The banquets here were so over the top, it birthed an Italian adjective, luculliano, meaning a particularly abundant and tasty meal. Remains of the villa still survive today and can be found in the basement of the castle. After the death of Lucullus, ownership of the property fell into the hands of the Roman Empire and was transformed into a fortress, referred to as Castellum Lucullanum, after its previous owner. Upon the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and after being the place of exile for its last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, it was then converted into a monastery by the Byzantine monks in the 5th century AD. This remained the case until the late 10th century, when the Neapolitans themselves razed the structure to the ground. After the invading Saracens imprisoned a bishop on the islet, only to be saved later on, the fear was that they would, on subsequent attempts, use the structure in order to fortify themselves and take over the city. The site stood bare until Roger the Norman, the first official king of Naples, ordered the building of a new castle, which is the Castel de Lavoro that we see today. According to Neapolitan folklore, however, the creation of the castle is, strangely enough, attributed to the poet Virgil. He was a lover and frequent visitor of the city, and, I guess due to his intelligence and eccentricity, amassed quite a following. For his admirers, Virgil was a sort of patron and protector of the city. They believed him to have superhuman powers, something that allegedly the poet himself never refuted. Now, how does this tie in with the castle? Well, the Neapolitan people believed, or believe, as I'm sure many still do, that he himself was responsible for the creation of the castle. The myth is fairly inconsistent, but some allege that it was built on top of a magical ostrich egg that would break only if the fortress was conquered, whereas other legends suggest that the egg was laid by the siren Parthenope upon her death after being refuted by Odysseus, and was taken by Virgil and placed within the dungeons of the castle itself. According to the legend, its destruction would lead to the castles as well as causing several cataclysmic style events throughout the city. This was so widely believed that after the castle was damaged due to a structural collapse in the 14th century, Queen Joan I had to swear to the people that she had replaced the egg in order to prevent panic. These are just the cliff notes and a fraction of the castle's extensive lore, so if you found it remotely interesting, I encourage you to read up on the rest. I settled at the port at the base of the castle and admired it as I took my daily dose of the beverage that, for the past 5 years, has been turning me into a functioning alcoholic. For my sins, the glass you see before you cracked inexplicably and showered me with orange soda. Great. The waitress took some convincing before conceding that it was almost definitely not my fault before giving me a free replacement. You see, situations like these are why I'm glad I learned Italian. I next had a wander down the port and got up close to the castle as the sun began to set. The port at night, full of music, life, and faraway lights, was truly a sight to behold. Amidst the hustle and bustle, a trolley in a fountain, a preacher with a megaphone, and a kid on a scooter intent on sending me to an early grave.
Any fucking need for that? Absolute fucking moron.
I was ready to call it a day and head back to my hotel. With both my phone and camera at 1%, I came upon a familiar sight. Our boy, Vittorio Emanuele II, who would, as he did for many Italians seeking unity in the 19th century, point me in the direction of home. And thus ended my final night in Napoli. But I have a funny suspicion that it won't be the last.